Hey, what's up guys, I'm Praetorian and welcome to episode 0 of our new Europa Universalis series with the Domination expansion. So here in episode 0, we're going to be talking about the mod that we'll be using for the Let's Play. So this video will not contain any actual gameplay. Trying out a different format here, because I don't like how our episode 1s are constantly requiring me to talk about all these different things, whether it's the new features of a new expansion and patch, whether it's the different changes that a mod might introduce that we happen to be using, or just anything else that I might be discussing, like a setup, for instance. In Hearts of Iron 4, we might use this format for the setup, which always takes a long time when we select like all the different routes of the focus tree that the AI is going to be going. We could instead do that in episode 0. So that way our gameplay is not starting like 20 something minutes in those HiJynx series, because it takes so long to get everything set up. So yeah, with the Domination DLC, we'll be playing with France, and there's many different options we could have selected, because this DLC adds quite a bit of content to pretty much all the major countries, the majority of the major, most popular countries among players. And so we had a lot of options. So the countries that got a lot of content would be England, the two Spanish countries, Castile and Aragon, France, of course. I don't think there's anybody here that got a lot of content. Muscovy was a focus. Ottoman Empire was probably the most important country for the patch and expansion. The patch was actually named the Ottoman patch. I'm not sure if there's any other European countries I'm leaving out. I don't think so. And then China, Ming China, and Japan. Now there were some other countries that didn't get as much content, so like Portugal, Brandenburg, Prussia, Venice, Korea. So other countries that got some content. Basically, I wanted to select one of the countries that was a major focus of the expansion. So we've done 3 EU4 campaigns on this channel, so not many, over the course of 8 years that I've been doing this. Almost 8 years, it'll be 8 years in September, so I guess it's like 7.5 years or whatever. So I don't play EU4 much on the channel. I'm actually going to talk about that in this video, why I don't play EU4, because it's important for explaining what this mod does and why I made these changes. But yeah, I don't play EU4 very often, not on the channel, not off camera either, because I just don't enjoy the game as much as I used to. A lot of the changes that they made over the last several years I didn't really like, but it's brought me back in because I really liked what they did with the last expansion. I think it's called Lions of the North. And then when I was reading about what they were doing with this expansion, I was really excited because they're focusing on a lot of the countries I really like playing as, and I just liked what they were doing. The mission trees were exciting. I don't really like the mission trees that much. But yeah, the mission trees were exciting, just a lot of cool stuff. So they brought me back in, and I couldn't play the game without making a mod for it, because the other things that I don't like about the game are still present, and are too irritating for me to play as it is. So we'll discuss all this a little bit later. But yeah, basically I had the 3 campaigns on the channel. The first one was as Muscovy. That was one of the first campaigns, one of the first series I ever did on YouTube. So it's not on our channel anymore. I did delete it because it was horrible. It was very new to doing this. It wasn't very good. It was full of all kinds of technical issues and stuff too. And so I figured we wouldn't play Muscovy just because I did technically play as them once. And then the second series was England, and that was fun. It was another very old series. I don't know if I could recommend watching it. It is very old. It's like 5 years old, something like that. But yeah, we played as England. And then, back in 2020, we played as Milan. Now, outside of Europe, I don't really like playing as China in EU4. Never really enjoyed their gameplay. And Japan could be a fun playthrough, but we just did Japan playthrough with Victoria 3, so I didn't really want to do another Japanese campaign this soon, even if it is in a different game. And so really there was only 3 choices. I suppose 4 choices, since Aragon and Castile are both a separate country. But yeah, you could play as one of the Spanish countries. You play as France, or you play as the Ottoman Empire. Now the Ottomans are the most powerful of those 3, so I kind of eliminated them based on that. They're generally considered the easiest country to play as, so I was really wanting to play with some of their new content, but yeah, they would have been the easiest campaign overall. So eliminated them. Both France and Castile are pretty easy, just because they're major countries, I suppose. They can still be challenging, especially with this mod and some of the changes it makes. But yeah, I felt like France was the one I was most interested in based on the developer diary. It looked really cool. Some of the things they changed and re-adding the vassal swarm and just all the new mechanics surrounding that. So yeah, that's who I decided to play as. Let's go and hop into the game and take a look at this mod and some of the changes. So my issues with EU4. There's 3 primary problems I have with the game. And those are, the first one being that it's not very historically accurate. Now you could make that argument with any of the Paradox historical games. They're not historically accurate. I think this one annoys me a little bit more though, because I have a bachelor degree in history, and the focus of that degree was on early modern European history. And so I'm very knowledgeable of this time period, particularly, here in Europe. So the historical inaccuracies in this game really bug me quite a bit more than it does in, other Paradox games like Hearts of Iron 4 or CK3. It just feels like Paradox creates the mechanic first. Just whatever mechanic they want to add to the game for whatever reason, and then they find something in history to name it after, even if it doesn't really make that much sense for the mechanic. That's what it seems like to me anyways. So the mod will not be fixing all those historical inaccuracies. Maybe a few of them it'll improve on, but for the most part that's not the focus of the mod. My second major issue with this game though is how you can fix every single problem by just clicking a button and spending some type of power. Reducing inflation. You see the button's grayed out. We can't do that. Of course we don't have any inflation, but if we did, we still wouldn't be able to do it. Because that has been removed, the ability to just click on the button. Because yeah, if you get inflation, you just click on this button and it's gone. Now it does require you to spend, your diplomatic power to do so, so there's always a cost for doing so. But the point is you get inflation and you just quickly get rid of it if you want to. Well, then same thing with war exhaustion. You get war exhaustion. It means your people are sick and tired of the war that you've been putting them through. You've been losing their houses, their farmland's been burned down, their family members been killed, got raiders raiding all their territory, and you just fix that with some military power. Just spend 75 military power, war exhaustion's gone. Of course 75 power is only going to tick it down by 2, so you may have to spend a lot more if you got a lot of war exhaustion, but the point is you can just easily fix it by spending this power up here, and then it's gone. Legitimacy. You got some legitimacy problems, just strengthen your government. You're good to go. No longer have legitimacy issues. Can't do that any longer. So all those have been changed in this mod. You can't just click a button to fix your issues anymore. You have to basically wait over time, because there's all kinds of modifiers that tick these up already. The game already has this function. And so these have been adjusted, of course, because of the fact that you can't just tick them up. So for instance, let's say we wanted to do a royal marriage with somebody. Let's say we're looking at doing a royal marriage. I don't know who we're all rivaled with. Yeah, we could do a royal marriage with Castile. So if we did that, you'll see we're only going to lose 1, where normally we'd lose 2 of our legitimacy. So you're going to lose less legitimacy for certain things. There's going to be less effects on it to reduce it, just to make it a little bit easier to keep your legitimacy higher. Because you can't just tick it up. But overall, it's going to be a problem. That's one thing I noticed when I was playing the mod and that campaign you might have saw on the start menu. I started as Denmark and then I formed Scandinavia. And yeah, I had some issues sometimes with the legitimacy. It was kind of an issue. I had to rebalance a little bit because it felt like it was just too low sometimes. But yeah, that's still a factor that you have to worry about, and you can't just fix it. So with the inflation, you have the advisor to reduce it. There's different national ideas that will reduce it, of course. So you got other ways to influence it, policies, whatever, to reduce inflation. You just can't push the button anymore. And then same thing with war exhaustion. War exhaustion in this mod. Let's get back into here. We won't be able to see without actually having war exhaustion. I suppose I can just go ahead and add it on. I think it's called exhaust. Let me try this out. Yeah, it looks like that worked. Okay, so now we have 5 war exhaustion, and you can see what the effects of that are. So the effects are a little bit worse. You can see we're going to get a hit to our military, something that you get a little bit of a hit to in vanilla, but it doesn't impact your morale, I don't believe. I don't recall what vanilla impacts, actually, because it's been a while since I played vanilla. But I know I've increased the effects here. Now you notice the instability reduction there. We'll talk about that here in a minute, because that's one of the more major changes in the mod. But basically, war exhaustion is a bit more penalizing, particularly with the new stability system. And also, it can get higher. So in vanilla, it can only go up to 20, I believe. Maybe 22, I think it's 20. In the mod here, it can go up to 30. So you can get much higher war exhaustion, which means much higher penalties. So yeah, you can't just reduce it. And you can see that here. Added that in there. You cannot magically fix everything by clicking a button. So that's one of my major issues with the game, is that you can just fix all your problems by spending some of these magical mana powers up here. And so that's no longer the case. Many of those things that you could use those for have been removed. You can't improve them that way. Stability is the big one. We'll talk about that in a second. But the third and final issue I have with EU4 is certain mechanics I really don't like, and some of those are mechanics that we'll be talking about today because the mod does change those. But let's talk about that new stability system. So in vanilla, you would improve your stability on the screen here. Again, you see that same notification there. You can't just click the button and fix it. So no longer can you boost stability by spending admin power, and instead that stability cost modifier, which reduces the cost or increases the cost that it takes to boost stability. So let's say you have a negative 20% modifier. I think the vanilla cost is 100, so it only costs you 80 admin power. Or if you got, say, a plus 20% modifier, then, you know, math, it's 120, right? So that's a modifier that's already in the game, and I've changed the effect of it and then changed the name of it to reflect that I've changed that. And so you can see that here in our country modifiers. It is instability reduction. And so prestige now affects it. A lot of things affect it. Overall, I've rebalanced a lot of the things that affect it, but not everything. I didn't go through every single modifier and change. For the most part, it's really just the core stuff that was changed. But like a lot of IDO groups impact it, and those are all pretty much the same as they were. They're going to impact it by the same amount as they did before. And so the way this works, this instability reduction, which I did have to name it this so that it fits with the color and the plus and minus sign, which I don't think I can change. Other Paradox games, you can change this. I think EU4, you can't change this at all. So I wanted it to make sense that it's red, and so that's instability reduction. I would prefer it to be like stability investment or something, but if it's stability investment and then it's plus red, then you know it's red, so it's bad, but it's a plus sign. It would indicate that you're investing more, right? And so it would make a whole lot of sense. And then you get the negative sign, which is green, telling you it's good, but the negative sign says you're investing less. And so that's the reason why I did instability reduction, just so it makes sense with the plus and minus sign here. But basically, there's a variable, a value, that you have to get up to 1 in order for stability to be increased by 1. And so these are actually a percentage here. And so this would be 0.046. And the war exhaustion is, causing that 0.05%. And so let's just say, for simple math purposes, this said plus 5%. We weren't getting the bonus from the prestige. So basically I have the code multiply this by a negative value here and then split it in half. So if you have that 5%, so 0.05, then it'll be multiplied by a negative. It's a positive here, so thus it'll become a negative, and then subtract from that. And because it's split in half, that means rather than 5%, it's going to be 2.5%. So essentially every month it would be reduced by 0.025. And once it got to -1, then you'd lose 1 stability, and then it would go back to 0. Likewise, let's say that this is instead reading minus 5% and it's green, because it's normally a stability cost reduction, and so the green is good and it's negative, right? So the code multiplies that by a negative number so that it would become a positive number, and then you'd be gaining 0.05 5%, but then it gets, cut in half, so 0.025 every single month. And then once it got to 1, then you get 1 stability. So seems somewhat confusing, but it's actually a pretty simple system overall. It didn't take that long to make. Changing everything in all the files is what took the longest amount of time. Creating this overall system didn't take very long at all. But yeah, then changing all of it so that the different, like for instance, all the events in the game make use of the system, but not everything does. Some things will just reduce stability or just increase stability or whatever. But events, all the events, which is where I really find this stability mechanic incredibly annoying. The stability is probably one of my biggest problems with the game, because it's not just about the fact that you can push a button and get rid of your stability issues. For me, the biggest problem is the damn random events. So these random events fire, and they're completely random. If you look at the code, they don't look at what's going on in your country at all. So everything will be going great in your country. You have +3 stability. You got fantastic prestige and legitimacy. Your king is great. Everything is going good. The economy is running well. And then you get some event that says that everything's a nightmare and everything's a mess, and so you're going to lose stability. Why? Everything's fantastic in my country. Doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't reflect what's going on in your country at all. They're just completely random, which is fine. Random things happen, I guess. And I'm not a big fan of RNG, but whatever. It's a game. And so you get these random events, and then they reduce your stability by 1. But really, since you can just spend the admin power to increase it, it's not really reducing your stability, is it? It's actually just taking away your admin power. So essentially that's all any stability events are. If they're giving you admin power, if they're giving you stability, then they're giving you admin power. If they're taking stability, then they're taking away admin power. That's really what it is. And so it's just kind of a dumb mechanic, I feel. I get this random event that says, oh, everything's bad, even though everything's actually good. So you take my stability, I'm at +3, because you spend the entire game at +3, generally, unless you got some kind of like disaster going on, which those are cool mechanics. I like the disaster system. And that's here. Now they've been changed to major events. I've changed the names to a lot of things, by the way, so you'll notice that. I feel like it opens up to be able to use them for more things. When it's called a disaster, it's got to be something bad, right? So I like to use them in my larger mod, because this mod is, again, a small mod that's been taken out of a much larger mod. I kind of stripped out a lot of the features from that larger mod. Since it's not updated, it's kind of a mess. The code is a mess because it's from like older versions of the game. So I stripped out parts from that larger mod in order to make this small mod for this Let's Play series. But yeah, because in that larger mod I used the disaster system for actually good events and things that aren't exactly disasters, I changed the name to major events. So that's been changed. I'll point out the different things that have been changed name-wise, just so you know. But yeah, you might have a disaster going on. Those are fun, and I mean they're difficult sometimes, and then it makes sense that you have all kinds of problems. But generally, you stay at +3 stability for the entire game, and most of the AI countries do as well. Even the AI is able to maintain pretty high stability. It's a joke system. There's really nothing to it. You just whenever you lose a little bit of stability, you invest in it again, and it's not that difficult to stay at +3 for the majority of the game. And so yeah, that's my other problem with the stability system, is the random events just taking it from you. It's the same thing as just taking admin power. So now those random events, they still take stability, but instead they take those they take the variable points. So essentially it's like half of what you'd normally lose. So where you'd lose some random stupid event that just fires because you got unlucky would take 1 stability from you. Instead it takes like a half of stability from you. So you're still losing stability, but it's not as much, and it's not an admin cost because you can't spend admin to fix it. You're actually losing stability, and it's just not as bad. You got a little unlucky, but it's only half of a stability, so might not even reduce your stability at all. Depends on where your variable's sitting at that moment, which again, a variable is just a number that's kept in the code. So that's the new stability system. Again, it's pretty hands-off. You just need to try and get the stability cost modifiers, or what the mod calls instability reduction. You just need to get those modifiers, and then the more you have, the quicker your stability goes up, and the more penalties you have to those, then it'll start going down. And it does have a bit of a balancing factor. So as your stability goes up, just like in vanilla, where it increases the cost to increase stability, your cost of admin power, it'll start reducing your stability. So if you are only increasing it slightly and it's going up really slow, then you might actually see it drop eventually. But again, because because it goes up when you get +1, and then it gets set to 0, and then it doesn't go down again until you get -1, you got a lot of time, given considering how much it's going down by. You got a while that you'll stay at +1 or whatever before it actually takes it from you. But you'll see it move a little bit more. It doesn't move as much as you'd think based on the way I'm describing this. But yeah, every few years it might go up or down or whatever. But usually it's only like major things that are happening that will throw it up much higher or much lower. So it's just kind of hands-off mechanic here. That's more reflective of the situation in your country. For instance, if you've got some prestige, you're going to get a little bit from it. It doesn't impact it much. If it's at full 100 prestige, you're getting, it'll say 5% here, but that's 0.05, so it's not going to make a huge difference, but it'll help a little bit. And by the way, negative stability does the same thing. If you have negative stability, then it'll go up faster the further your stability is. So if you're at -3, you're not going to stay at that very long unless you got some huge penalty to your reduction, your instability reduction. Otherwise, you're only going to stay at -3 probably a year or so. And I am still balancing this mechanic, so some may say that that's a little bit too fast, and feel free to post any suggestions on changes I should make to it, any feedback or whatever, once you see it working in the series, once we start playing. But I feel like, if you're sitting at -3 stability, you would immediately spend your admin power if you had it to fix it. So, I mean, you're still going to sit at -3 for far longer than you would in vanilla, outside of a situation where you go down to -3 and you don't have any admin power. But yeah, it's still going to result in you having negative stability for far longer. It's going to be much more difficult to sit at +3. It's not impossible, but you're going to really have to invest in those type of modifiers. You're going to have to really focus on those, and it makes that modifier, the instability reduction modifier, so much more important than it ever is in vanilla, which it is helpful, of course, because it's saving you admin power, but how often do you actually have to invest in your stability? So how much is it actually saving you? But in the mod, it's like always helping you. So much more important modifier. And you notice that the artist has had the instability reduction increased. In vanilla, that's a 10% modifier. It's now 15% modifier. So that's one of the major mechanics. One of the other ones I really want to talk about here is the changes to the fleets. So this is one that really annoys me, the transport ships, guys. It's just so unhistorical that these countries are building these big old transport ships only to move troops. That's their only purpose. I mean, you could use any ship to transport units. You could use a ship, a line, a frigate, whatever. Any ship you got to move troops. And they often would. They would get any ships they could to get the troops across. And they certainly wouldn't, just build ships that's all they could do, which is literally what transport ships do in this game. They can't do anything else. They suck at fighting. They can't help with trade. They can't do anything. All they do is transport units. And then you just have them sitting there. You got to build a lot of them if you want to transport a large number of units. If you don't want to have to wait for your whole army to move over to England, 30 units on 5 ships is going to take a while. Luckily, they did add that automatic mechanic, which they had to do that. The automatic transportation, because it's such an annoying mechanic. And so they had to add that because people were tired of using it. And so luckily, this has removed a lot of the micromanagement with transport ships. But that just shows you how bad the mechanic was, that they had to add this in here. Given it's useful regardless, even if it wasn't a crappy mechanic. But yeah, then you got these ships just sitting around. They're not expensive, but yeah, they're just sitting there, collecting dust. You probably mothballed them because there's no reason not to. And they just sit there in your port. So the way that I fix this is that I change the transport ships to a new class of ship called the frigate class. I've essentially changed all the classes in a way. In some form or manner, they have all been changed. The best way to look at this would be in the technology screen here. So let's just start at the bottom here. And I tried to flip the icons as much as possible. At the very least, they're now using that light ship. Well, and this is going to be confusing to people who are familiar with the game because all the names have been changed here. Some of them have been kind of flip-flopped. And so this is going to be a little confusing to some people familiar with it. But this is the light ship icon here, and it's now being used for the frigate, while the transport ship one is being used for these trade ships. So this class here, the trade ships, these are the vanilla light ships. So in vanilla, you got the light ships that really you just use for trade. You use them to protect your trade routes, and they they can be used for combat. They're not great, but they can serve adequately against, I suppose, maybe against the galleys and the open seas, where they're not getting their extra bonuses that the galleys get. I suppose you also use the light ships for exploration. I think you can use the heavier ships, but there's real no reason to use heavy ships for that. That's kind of expensive use of them, particularly if you end up losing them out there when they're doing an exploration mission. But yeah, you use the light ships for the exploration missions as well. So they have some other uses, but their main purpose for the majority of the game is to do the protect trade mission, which of course is in here. We want to set them up to protect trade, which they're going to get a loss here because we got those frigates in there. But I guess you can take a look at the description. I thought it showed the description there. Maybe it's when you hover over this here. Yeah, here you go. So here's I'll kind of show the description of each of these so you can pause it and read it if you're interested, because this explains what they do as well. Yeah, we'll go back into the text screen. I suppose the description's in here as well. But you'll notice that a lot of the names here were the names of the transport ships, because that's the way Paradox designed it. The ships that were usually used for trade in real life, they have those instead doing transporting troops. So they're not transporting trade, they're transporting troops, and they have no role in trade. So I thought that was really weird and historically inaccurate. So instead we got the actual trade ships. Again, many of these are names you'll recognize because they were used as light ships in vanilla. So those are the names and the text they unlock: the cog, the bark, the flute, the schooner, the Indiaman, and the clipper. So that's basically what they do. The same thing they do in vanilla, guys. These are the light ships. You'll use them for trade. So not much has changed there, except for the fact that they suck really bad at combat. So in vanilla, they're the third best ship because they're better than transport ships, at least. Transport ships are garbage in vanilla. But in this mod, these are the worst ships. You're not going to use them for anything but trade and exploration. You're not going to use them in combat. So we move up to the next level here. In vanilla, these are called galleys, but I've changed the name to light ships to represent a more wide variety of type of ships. And so in the beginning, you have the galleys and the galleasses. So those are all ships that you would use in like inland seas, like the Mediterranean, and maybe the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, I think is a really good example as well. Yeah, Baltic Sea and Mediterranean Sea are probably the two best examples here. But they've also got a new modifier. It's not new. It's new to me because I haven't played EU4 that much recently, but they didn't always used to have this, where now they get a combat bonus in these seas as well, any coastal seas. So they don't get as big of a bonus, which if you don't know, the galleys get a nice bonus when fighting in, you can see that here, when you hover over these seas, they do 100% more damage in combat. So while their overall combat stats aren't great, when they get that 100% modifier, and then you factor in the fact that they're really cheap to buy, they actually are pound per pound pretty good because they're so cheap, but only if they're fighting in the endless seas. Now they still get a modifier out here in the coastal, but it's only a 50% modifier, and given that they have such horrible stats, they're not going to do as well out in this area here. So that even opens us up more. Now they got the coastal sea modifier to being something more than galleys. And really, galleys, while certainly important in this time period, really important in this time period, they started dying out of use as being a major ship that was used even in the Mediterranean and the inland seas that Paradox has them designed to do well in. Even in those areas, about the middle of the period, actually not even quite the middle, considering how far the game goes. Yeah, it's not even the middle of the period, really. They really start to die out in use, and the much larger ships kind of take over the selling ships. And so I wanted this to be something else, not just to be galleys. So it makes sense for them to be useful throughout the entire campaign. And so you'll see that they then turn into the sloop of war, the brig. So these are light ships rather than just galleys. Because those are obviously not galleys. And they'll still get the combat bonuses, and it makes sense because those are the type of ships that you saw do well in, say, the Caribbean. They're very fast ships, and that's really what these light ships do well. Now, obviously, the galleys and the three versions of galleys are not super fast. They should be very maneuverable because they had the rowers. That's why they get those combat bonuses in these areas. And so yeah, they're not as fast. Their sailing speed is not as fast as the later light ships, but the later ones are some of the fastest ones in the game. They're very, very fast. And so as you can read here, they're basically able to combine the ability to do combat decently. They're not great, but they can defeat some of the frigates in these inland seas. And any ship they can't defeat, they can outrun, is the kind of idea here. And because they're so cheap, because they're still cheap here in the mod, you can get a lot of them. And then you could, kind of outnumber your enemies. So now we move up to the next class, which is the frigate class. These are the vanilla transport ships, and they now have a use. They're the main combat ship that you start with. In fact, you don't start with the heavy ships, which have been renamed in the mod to Ship of the Lines. Heavy ship is actually a fine name. We could have kept it as heavy ship, particularly because we have the light ships. But I decided to change it to Ship of the Line because I wanted to use the rating system, the British rating system, and so Ship of the Line fit better for that. And each of the descriptions, you'll notice they talk about what rates they are, and some of them are actually named after the rate. We got the 5th rate here. Here you got the 2nd rate 3-decker, 1st rate 3-decker, so on. But they'll say in the description which rate they are, and those are all historically accurate as well. But yeah, these are the ships of the line, and these are the frigates, and you don't get the ship of the lines at the start of the game. So basically, it's the way that EU4 used to be when it first came out, before they added the early Carracks. So those, I don't recall when those were added, but they added them so that they could have the heavy ships in the beginning. And I don't think that's historically accurate at all. I don't think that makes any sense. I actually liked that you had to wait for the heavy ships to unlock. And so basically it re-adds that system where there are no heavy ships in the beginning of the game, which is a problem for vanilla. I understand why Paradox did that, because you don't actually have a true combat ship, since you have the obviously the galleys, but for the rest of the areas outside of the inland seas, they didn't have a combat ship. So I can see why they wanted to change it. But here in the mod, we got the frigate class, and so they are going to dominate until you get those cracks at level 6 is when you get those. And so it doesn't take that long to get them. But yeah, you'll eventually get them unlocked. The time that they unlock, I try to keep them as historically accurate as possible. Now, you can't just look at the level and then base it off vanilla because the whole text system has been changed. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But yeah, these are the frigates that we have here. So we got the Caravel, the frigate, the heavy frigate, the 5th rate, and then we got the Razzie or Razy, not sure the pronunciation, but basically that's a ship of the line that has had one of its decks removed. So it has like reduced top weight, and the ship becomes more maneuverable, and then they would often be used as like a 5th or the 4th rate, sometimes a 4th rate, depending on how many guns it has, of course. And then we got the Great Frigate, which is the last one here. And so yeah, this frigate class, they're much faster than the heavier ships, so they can, try and escape those. Given it's sometimes difficult to maneuver in EU4 if you're not paying attention to your fleet and stuff, but they're faster. So if you had a fleet that doesn't have the heavier ships in it, then the frigates could get away from a fleet that did have the ships of the line in it, and they're pretty decent. They can, if there's enough of them, they can defeat heavy ships. And they can also defeat the light ships, though they might have some difficulty if they're outnumbered in the inland sea. Essentially, they're a very versatile ship that's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. They also produce trade power, but they can't do the trade missions on their own. They transport your troops still. Technically, they're still those transport ships, so they're going to transport your troops as well. They can fight in combat, just not as well as the heavy ships. They kind of do a little bit of everything. Just, they don't do any of it as good as some of the other ships. But they're significantly cheaper than the heavier ships, and you have them unlocked in the beginning. So it's definitely something that you'll want to make use of. In fact, a large chunk of your fleet can be the frigates, so that you can move the troops around, and then you can still use them in combat. And the heavy ships, the ships of the line, are very expensive. So I think in vanilla, ships of the line are 50 gold, 50 ducats. In this mod, that's what the frigates are. Well, the ships of the line are double that price. So they're very, very expensive. They have an insane maintenance cost. And, of course, they're the ultimate ships that you have here. Incredibly powerful, can easily sink anything else. Slower, and they get even more slower as you get larger ships. Now, in my larger mod, one thing I had is that you couldn't upgrade ships to other designs. Instead, you had to actually rebuild build new ships. That is not the case in this one. We can update all the ships to the new designs. It's just like it is in vanilla. So I didn't add that in for this little mod because you kind of need some of the other mechanics that I had in that larger mod to be able to make that work properly. Which I was going to add all that in here. So we can upgrade the ships. So as we get the Galleon, we can upgrade that to the 74. Yeah, very powerful ships, far more powerful than you'll see in vanilla, by the way. They have a lot more cannons overall, and they're all historically accurate as well, based on the cannons and stuff, and speeds, ship speeds. I did a lot of research when it comes to ship types. I've always been really into selling ships, so a lot of this is pretty accurate overall. As accurate as I could be, it's still a game, of course. Now, after I spent a stupid amount of time talking about ships, but again, it's one of my favorite mechanics in the mod. I just love getting rid of those damn frigates. I did change the technology system up as well, or changed all the text. I've gone through all of them. If you wanted to, you could read all their new descriptions as we play, because many of these are new, not all of them. But yeah, you see many new names and descriptions for the text, and I rebalanced everything. So essentially, the military text, rather than grant you these huge bonuses where certain techs are like immensely important, like one country gets that tech and then they can just dominate over all the other countries in a almost unrealistic way. It's just how ridiculous just getting one tech was. I feel like certain technologies, of course, were like that, but not in the type of system that Paradox has here for their tech. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. That's because you got the printer a little bit sooner than me. Your military's 10 times better now. Maybe not 10 times better, but it's ridiculous how huge some of these modifiers were. These have been spread out a bit more, so that basically every tech is important, where, in the vanilla system, there's a bunch of techs that are kind of useless and don't really do much, or they'll have like little increments that aren't all that helpful. And this one, the increments are overall smaller for each tech, but each one is more powerful, and you never really get those garbage techs that you see in vanilla. Given up here, there are some of those because there's just not as much stuff to do with these. But overall, military techs, you always want to get them, but each one is not as powerful. Now, if you are a couple techs ahead of somebody, you're still going to stomp them, obviously. You're going to have a huge advantage over them. But one tech isn't going to make as significant of a difference as you see in vanilla. But they're still pretty important. Overall, I guess I can hover over these so you can see exactly what levels you're getting on each one. Overall, they're pretty close to the same numbers as vanilla. I just spread them out across the text. And this is where you're going to unlock these. There's been a few new units added. You'll notice demi-lancers here for cavalry. Western Cav, I don't know why vanilla has Western Cav being so terrible. It's just absolute garbage for so long. You're stuck with the level 1 Cav units until I don't know what it is in Paradox's game, but in the vanilla game, but for a while, it's for a long time that you're stuck with those units, and they're just terrible. And I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So we got the demi-lancers in here, and you still don't get those until level 8, so it takes a while before you get them. There's no new infantry units though. I didn't change anything there. And then artillery, I think there might be one new unit. Now some of these you might not recognize. That's because the patch actually added a bunch of new cavalry, a bunch of new artillery units. I don't know how many it was, like 5 or something like that. So you'll notice a much higher number of them here, and that's to give you like choices. I think every level now has a choice. Yeah. So I really like that they added that, and that was with this patch. I think I had one more in there, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But point is, not a lot of changes with the infantry and the artillery. Just kind of changing around when they unlock, just to kind of fit with the new tech system. Because with the techs, there's also new techs. There's a total of 3 new techs, I believe. I think there's 32 in vanilla and there's 35 in the mod here. So 35 for each. So just rebalanced all this. Also, I believe the ahead of time modifiers have been changed a bit as well. Military now grants 1. And yeah, you no longer get the reduction of corruption. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. So yeah, these are pretty much the same outside of that being reduced. But then there's also a modifier here, yearly army tradition. I think it makes sense that if you're ahead of time in military tech, you'd get some kind of bonus from it. The paradox looks at it as each military tech is already beneficial, so that's the reason why you don't get a bonus for being ahead of time. You'll notice here this is administrative organization. Well, that's because in vanilla this is called administrative efficiency, and in my mod, the larger mod, I already had an administrative efficiency, and so I had to rename this when Paradox added it. But in this mod here, we don't have that, so I could have kept the name. I didn't even know that that was actually still named that. But again, this has all been stripped out of larger mods, so that's the reason why it's still named that. But that's administrative efficiency. Maybe I'll change it back sometime if I get the time, just so that nobody's confused by that. As far as the idea groups, you now have a total of 10. And so I guess we'll take a peek at that real quick. So if you used to play mods for EU4 a long time ago, then you may have heard of the 10th idea mod. That was one that I created, and it was actually my most popular mod, despite it being a really small mod that I released that allowed you to get 10 ideas instead of 8 idea groups, I mean. And it did spawn a whole bunch of other mods that people, asked me if they could use my work for. So you can get like 12 idea groups or 14 idea groups. So yeah, those all were based off of my original work, and I think they used the same name. They called it like the 12th idea. But yeah, that was my most popular mod, surprising, because it was just a little small one, but people really liked it. I don't think it's something you can download anymore though, because I haven't been modding in a long time or updating my mods or anything like that. This has not been changed at all, but you'll notice that there are 3 new ones here that came in the recent patch and expansion. I think it's part of the patch, so they have these 3 new ones down here. Yeah, none of this has been changed. You just now have the ability to get the ability to get 10 instead of 8, and all this has kind of been rebalanced. Another thing that's been changed is in order to get your special national ideas, so the ones you get that are unique to your country, you can no longer get those for every 3 that you get, because that results in you getting all these fairly quickly. Because I think there's 7 of these, and so that's basically, if you're doing 3 each, that's 21. So essentially you get it after you get 3 of these, which really didn't make any sense with the names that they were using. So yeah, if you look at France here, I mean, this is something that should be unlocking at like the late 17th century here. But yeah, you can get that fairly quickly because you only got to get the first 3. So I've changed this so you need 7. Basically, every time you finish one of these, you get one unlocked. Now, that does mean that every time you do a finisher, it's pretty powerful, because not only are you going to get the last one and the bonus to that, you're also going to get the bonus for having completed the idea group, and then you'll get one of these unlocked too. And so that requires you to get all the way down here in order to unlock the last one. And so these unlock much slower. Buildings, my mod changes all the buildings, and I did not add my buildings in because it required me to redo all the UI and stuff. I would have liked to because I like my building system a lot better. So these are vanilla buildings here, but it's in here with the espionage, some of the espionage abilities where things have changed a bit. So I moved these around a little, but the key here is fabricating claims. So in the vanilla game, you can fabricate claims immediately. As soon as you start the game, you can start fabricating claims on other countries. And I really like that it's so easy to get claims. It means that they're kind of irrelevant. If you get a claim from a mission or whatever, a permanent claim is nice because you never lose it, but it's not that important. And a lot of those missions give you all these permanent claims, and that's all they give you. Like, that's like something significant. And yet I can just get claims, through my diplomats. So now you can't start using the fabricate claims until you get Tech 20. And so that's about 1650, I think, is when that's supposed to unlock, or when you're supposed to be able to get it. Obviously, most players probably get a little bit earlier than that. So it does lock off the fabricating claims for about half the game or so. So you won't be able to do that. But I've yet to find too many issues with that. So an interesting result of this change is that I end up using a lot more different types of CBs, a lot more various CBs that I would never use before because I didn't need to. I'd just get the claim and then use that, declare war, because I just want to take territory, and that's the best option. But now sometimes you want to start this war up, you got to use different CBs. And so I thought that was kind of fun when I was playing my campaign. Once I changed this, is that I'm using CBs that I never really used before. So that's kind of the major change here. And I don't think there's too much else to talk about here with the text. The forts have been renamed. So you'll see that That doesn't really change anything, but yeah, that's all been renamed a bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So that's most of the big stuff. As I said, it's not a huge mod, it just makes some important changes. A few other things, the troops now have different speeds based on the different type. So artillery is really slow, cavalry's faster, infantry's in the mid-range. So vanilla removed that because they reasoned that the units would all move the same speed because they have to move at the same speed of the supply wagons, which is true. Cavalry didn't typically race far ahead of the army. Not that far ahead, not the level that we're talking about here in Paradox's provinces. They didn't generally move that fast, but they could. They could move that fast if you had a reason to. Again, you'd have to try and find a way to keep them supplied, so that you're moving thousands of cav units, far out. I can see why they might have removed that, make them move the same speed. But yeah, I felt like it adds a little bit of flexibility, that you can take the cab out and have them go forward a little bit faster. Cab's kind of garbage, so I felt like giving them an additional benefit, their extra speed, was worth doing. So they're a little bit faster, and the artillery's slower. So that means if you put artillery in your army, they're going to move slower because obviously your army's going to move at the speed of the slowest unit. And so there is a benefit to not having artillery. Not that you're going to do that. You're probably going to have artillery in your unit still, but it's just a point that if you don't have artillery, you can move a little bit faster, and that really speeds up the cav, since every other army's going to have the artillery in it, and so the cav's even faster in those cases. Force limit has also been reduced a little bit. That's not a huge difference. It's going to mostly be impacting the smaller countries. There's all these passive modifiers that are just applied, force limit modifiers that are applied to every country regardless of size. And so every country gets, X amount of units regardless of how large they are. And so those numbers have been reduced. Instead, it relies more on your actual development in the provinces. So that's a change. Another minor change is with the conversion for religious conversion. So it's a little bit more difficult. However, your tolerance now impacts your missionary strength. So if you're more tolerant of a faith, then people are going to be less likely to convert. What reason do they have to convert to your faith if you're tolerant of them? And the more tolerant you are, the less likely they are to convert. Likewise, the more intolerant you are, the more likely they are to convert. So our tolerance to heathens has given us a local missionary strength of plus 1%. Now, since the total missionary strength has been reduced, that would just basically put it at the vanilla level if we're just sitting at -2 here. But essentially, if you get any modifiers that are decreasing your tolerance, then it's actually going to, give you benefits when it comes to converting them. But of course, you're going to get all these other negative penalties because you're being less tolerant of those people. And so there is an actual positive now of being intolerant, and that you can convert them faster. And there's now that negative of being more tolerant. It's going to be more difficult to actually convert those provinces because they don't have any reason to convert because you're tolerating their faith. So that's a change. Another one is with the autonomy. So autonomy now has an equilibrium where, as autonomy goes up, it'll start going down in a sense. And so basically it'll sit at a certain level based on how much, the autonomy is being affected. And so it'll kind of sit at a certain point, essentially. So if you have a high autonomy, it can still, a modifier that's really high, it can still get extremely high. But you won't see it as high levels as what you see in vanilla. And one benefit of autonomy now is that it decreases the unrest. So in vanilla, I don't think it impacts that at all, which I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. If you're giving a province more autonomy, they had more freedom, then they'd be less likely to rebel. I mean, if they're sitting at 100% autonomy, and what are they unhappy about? They're not paying any taxes. They're not joining your armies. They're just doing whatever they want. So why are they going to rebel against you? The ruler personalities, or ruler traits, whatever you want to call them, have also been changed slightly. Not the modifiers, but the conditions for when a character can get these different traits. They've been made to make a little bit more sense than they do in vanilla. You have all kinds of weird situations where you have these leaders that are just absolutely fantastic, and then they'll have a trait, a certain type of ruler personality that would make absolutely no sense. Like they have really high diplomacy or something, and then the ruler trait says that they're horrible at diplomacy. Or they have all level 5, level 6 skills, And then it says they're an incompetent buffoon. So some of those oddities have been fixed with the ruler, heir, and consort personalities. Now, I did not make it so that a good character can't have any bad traits, or that a bad character can't have any good traits, because that would obviously not be how you want it to be designed. Now, I did mention that there were a few different things I changed the name to. One of them would be the harsh treatment. I think that's in this one here. So with the harsh treatment, we can't see that because we don't have any rebels, but normally in the game it's called harsh treatment. I changed that to oppress, so you oppress the rebels rather than harsh treat them. I just felt that was weird wording, so that's been adjusted. The estates are now called interest groups. Those of you who played my old mod, Lex Talionis, which, you know, some of the features in this tiny mod were taken from that old mod. So if you played that, then you'll recall that I changed the name of estates to social groups. It's kind of a stupid name. It was still better than estates in my opinion. But Victoria 3 named these interest groups, and I think that's a more fitting name than social groups or estates. So those have been changed as well. Remember, these are all just basically cosmetic changes that don't have any effect in the game. I really don't like the estate name because, first of all, it only works for a couple countries. There's only a few countries that called what these are estates. France is one of them, so I guess it's fitting for the country we're playing as. So we could have left this as estates for France, but it's also very limiting. You can only have, if you want to be accurate, you can only have the 3, or in the case of like Sweden or something, they had a 4th estate. So you can only have those 3 or 4 estates, which is fine for most countries, but there's a lot of countries that will have other interest groups that do not fit into the estate system. So like the Cossacks over here in the east, they'll be in the interest groups, or the Janissaries. They'll be over here called an estate. So that was changed since estates don't fit for most countries in the game, or even for most of this time period that the game covers. And also it's just kind of limiting on what all you can put in here, when in my mod I've got a lot more different types of interest groups. And then the last thing regarding name changes is heir chance has been called fertility. I don't know if you can actually see that anywhere here, since we already have an heir. There's probably a bunch of other small modifiers that I'm probably neglecting, like winter. Winter impacts your troops more, causes far more casualties to attrition, and also it slows down the movement of your troops. That used to be in Vanilla Paradox, but they removed it for some reason. But yeah, now moving through winter provinces, particularly heavy winter provinces that have a lot of snow on the ground, are going to result in your troops moving a lot slower. Just kind of makes sense that they'd have higher attrition, slower movement, in my opinion. So like little stuff like that. Another big thing change with the combat is the combat die has been reduced. I don't remember what it is in vanilla. I think 10 or something. I don't know. I don't know what the combat die is. Maybe 12. But it's been reduced to 6. So the number of sides a die actually has. Mainly just to reduce the randomness to combat a little bit. There obviously is still some randomness. You still have the die roll. But it's not as high, so you're going to see that not only is you're not going to be able to get those higher numbers, but overall you're going to see much smaller numbers, since there's only the 6 sides to the die. So like reducing some of that randomness while still keeping it there as well. But yeah, I think that's it. That's all the major stuff. Again, there's been a ton of little balance changes, guys, that you may notice as I play. Little small stuff, little adjustments I made, but those are all the major changes. The big changes here in the mod. And I've tested a little bit. I played that whole playthrough, but I've made some changes since then. And the playthrough went well. I had to change a bunch of other things. As far as bugs, there's only one that I know about right now, and that's the ships. Let me see if I can show you that. Something's messed up with them, man. Well, this one's fine. Something's messed up with the look to them. Because I did change all those up, change like the size, change which ones I use and stuff. And it worked all fine before in my old mod. Yeah, I don't really have an example here to use because this looks fine. But some of the ship designs aren't using the right model, basically. So you'll see some models that that don't fit the actual ships. And there's one, and I have not been able to fix. I think it's the flutes, maybe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I think it's those ones. They're just a army unit walking in the water. So that's unfortunate. I've been trying to get it fixed, guys. I'm going to keep on working on it, and maybe we'll get it fixed before we actually get those. I'm not entirely sure what the issue is. I've looked all through it, and I can't find the problem. But yeah, some of the models are messed up for the ships. They're not using the right model, but obviously that's just cosmetic and doesn't have any in-game effect. Well, that's the one bug that I know about. I don't think there's any other issues. There may be some balance problems that we'll continue to work on, and feel free throughout the series to provide any feedback on things you think should be changed, even if they're things my mod doesn't touch. If it's something that's not going to take a lot of work and isn't going to make a drastic change to the overall campaign, because obviously once it's ongoing we don't want to make huge changes to it. But yeah, we can make little minor adjustments if you got a good argument for it. And that's one of the benefits of using my own mod here, is that I can fix any problems that might arise during the campaign, and we can make little adjustments, minor adjustments. We don't want to make huge changes. But yeah, feel free to post any feedback regarding the mod, or changes you want to see, or things you think aren't working right, or things you don't think I should have in place. Obviously, it will be too late for episode 1 since this video is coming out with episode 1, but we can change them in later episodes. But I hope you found this episode 0 to be helpful. Let me know what you think about this format. I mean, I think it's much better, obviously, doing it this way than putting all this into episode 1. It wouldn't have worked doing it that way. But let me know what you think about doing it with some of the other campaigns, like Hearthstone 4, doing it with that, or with Stellaris, or whatever we end up playing. We can do like an episode 0, and I can include some stuff in there to get it out of the episode 1. So for those who don't care about this kind of stuff, which might be the majority of you, I don't know how many people actually watch this, that'll also kind of dictate whether I continue doing this, is how many people watch this or care about it. But yeah, that's something we can do in the future if it's something you guys like, and really it's just the benefit of not having it in the episode 1, I think. But yeah, I hope you guys did find this helpful and you did enjoy it. If you did, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. I do hope to see you on that episode 1, which will be coming out with this video, or shortly after this video. So I do hope to see you guys on that episode, and should be a fun series. Looking forward to it.